I call the Charlottesville City Council February 17, 2026 meeting to order. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilor Fleischer?
Here.
Vice Mayor Oshrin?
Here.
Councilor Payne?
Here.
Councilor Snook?
Here.
Mayor Wade?
Here. Is there a motion to approve or amend the agenda?
I would move the approval of the agenda.
Second.
Second? Okay, if there's no changes, can we take a vote? All in favor, please say yes.
Yes?
Yes.
All opposed, please say no. Okay, thank you. Motion passes 5-0. The meeting will be divided into 3 sections. The first will be a work session where we hear and discuss presentations that do not require a council vote, followed by a closed session. And then council will have its regular business meeting at 6:30. The first report we will get will be on affordable housing, the tax abatement program proposal presentation, and looks like it will be Jeremy Goldstein. Yep. Okay.
Hello,
Hello.
I'm Kelly Brown, Director of Neighborhood Development Services, and I'm just doing a brief introduction before Mr.
Thank you.
Goldstein joins you. Yes. Okay. So, by way of introduction and background, at a City Council meeting on April 21st, 2025, Council charged staff with conducting research and analysis to determine if an affordable housing tax abatement program could have a material impact to incentivize housing construction in Charlottesville, within the context of the high costs associated with housing construction. If such program could have an impact, Council also asked staff to define an optimal tax abatement program structure that could improve housing construction financing and minimize administrative complexity. In June 2025, staff contracted with 3TP Ventures to lead and conduct this study, market analysis, and model building to test the potential impact of an affordable housing tax abatement on the feasibility of housing construction projects. The goal of this project, therefore, is to enable an informed recommendation to Council regarding a tax abatement program in Charlottesville. 3TP has reached the point where they have prepared a final report and completed a feasibility model that they will present and demonstrate for you this evening. This is not an action item, as we are here in a work session setting, but rather an opportunity for councilors to learn more about this research, ask questions, provide feedback and insights, and learn how this feasibility model can help with the policy and programmatic considerations related to affordable housing tax abatement. So here tonight, this afternoon, to present their report and demonstrate the feasibility model is Mr. Jeremy Goldstein from 3TP Ventures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today about this project. There is a presentation, though I'll admit I don't know how I access it.
If the clicker's not there, it's over there.
Great.
Let's see. Wonderful. Thanks. Yeah, so we're here to talk about the tax abatement feasibility analysis, the work that we've been doing over the last 10 months. We'll talk about a range of things, the study purpose and methods, the tool itself that we developed that Kelly just mentioned, and some of the findings from that work, and then I think importantly the key takeaways. But instead of leaving the sort of the findings to last, we'll actually start with a summary of them here, and then we can talk about how we got to them. So I think there's sort of 4 main points that are worth mentioning here. The first, an evaluation of the current housing development market. There's really limited development feasibility across project types, whatever kind of building, and across submarkets. And we'll talk a little bit more detail in how we got to these numbers. But that ultimately this is a constrained housing market as of today. The question sort of necessarily arises as to what role the inclusionary zoning requirement plays in market feasibility, and what we found was that inclusionary zoning certainly has a role in limiting feasibility, but on its own, even without inclusionary zoning, this would just be a currently difficult housing market for the private sector to meet their financial goals. As it relates to a tax abatement, while there are lots of different types of abatements and levels of abatement, On the main, they all have clear merit to some degree. They all help to close the financial gap that currently exists in Charlottesville's housing market. And yet, for many of the abatements that we were initially tasked to look into, especially those where the abatement itself is tied exclusively to the affordable units within a building as opposed to the entire building itself, those abatements generally don't offset the financial impacts of inclusionary zoning, nor do they ensure any kind of immediate major market change. So if you were to include a tax abatement today, it wouldn't necessarily be the case that you would see robust changes in your housing market tomorrow. However, I think there's still clear benefit in this, and there's certainly alternative sort of styles and incentives or interventions that could also be encouraged, and we'll show you some of that. Okay, so with that, now we'll get into some of the details. So the purpose of this project was really an evaluative one. We were to evaluate the feasibility of your housing market today, evaluating the financial feasibility or the financial impacts of the inclusionary zoning requirement on all projects of 10 units or more. We were tasked with evaluating the financial impacts of a tax abatement under these conditions, and then lastly, to provide a mechanism, or more specifically, a tool, a spreadsheet pro forma-based tool that allows for continuing monitoring of the housing market and allows you to continually monitor the impacts of your various incentives and interventions that the public sector can employ. This means that there's some things that this project is and some things that this project isn't. So I want to talk about that and make sure we're sort of all on the same page here. What this project is first, it is primarily a means to inform policy decisions as it relates to the financial impacts of your public policy interventions. Two, it is designed to be a collaborative effort. By which we mean this is not done in a way that was just behind closed doors, where the information that seeds this information is unavailable. It was done in concert with city staff. It was done in concert with stakeholders like the Housing Advisory Committee and Cadre, other local developers outside your local area, to make sure that we had sort of the best information that we could. And yet it still relies on ongoing, reliable data on the inputs that go into any kind of financial feasibility analysis. And lastly, this is really designed to be a transparent, flexible, and adaptable way to continue to evaluate these problems. There's not a static moment in which you can employ a change and see magic changes in the housing market. This is the kind of thing that is ongoing, and it is worth having a tool that allows you to evaluate today, tomorrow, and moving forward. And this leave behind tool is that mechanism. What this project is not meant to be a tool that leads to an obvious recommendation on a policy. There's still other things left to be done, especially as it relates to some of these other bullets. For one thing, for any kind of pro forma financial feasibility analysis of the housing market, you never really can, in a generalized way, cover, in a generalized tool that we've created, cover all the various intricacies of any sort of specific project. Every project is unique. Every parcel is unique. Every market decision is unique, and the mechanisms of financing are all unique. And so we don't want to say that this should be kind of like a reasonable replacement for the work that the private sector is doing all the time. This is an evaluation strictly of the rental market, so this does not include a for-sale market evaluation. And lastly, it doesn't involve any evaluation of sort of the non-financial impacts of any of this work. There are administrative costs that are associated with all of these decisions that have not been included or vetted. This really is just a financial evaluation, which is not the exclusive decision-making vehicle for whether or not housing gets built. Tax abatement was the primary policy that we were asked to look at. You'll see that we did add a few others, but just to make sure we're kind of all on the same page about the tax abatement as defined. Here it is, we mean a temporary reduction in taxes, generally to encourage a particular activity. In this case, the provision of affordable dwelling units. It's authorized under the Industrial Development and Revenue Bond Act, and in Virginia, it is in fact a performance-based grant. In other words, someone has to pay all their taxes and then they are reimbursed after the fact. All right, so let's dive into this tool that was built. We'll start just letting you know, so the whole purpose of this thing is to develop a tool that looks a lot like the private sector pro forma feasibility analysis tool. but one that is imbued with the ability to test public incentives. Because it's then something that we should want to be able to test things across Charlottesville's market now and in the future, it allows for the ability to analyze across all different kinds of building types, from single family to high rise, across different submarkets, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean in submarkets for this tool, and varying levels of affordability. The tool also allows for evaluation of financial impacts. Some of them, the traditional impacts that are used for the private sector, things like yield on cost and internal rate of return. Those are the two that we chose for this exercise. But we also want to include some other trade-offs that maybe are not so sort of esoteric and only the purview of those who are accustomed to dealing with housing development, and look at some other kind of maybe more intuitive kinds of trade-offs. So like literally how much money it has to be given up, how much money would be returned in abatement, what are the sort of the costs, financial costs of doing a tax abatement at these varying levels. I hope in terms that are easier to take in. We're going to walk through an example of like using this tool, but this is the interface as built now. The idea here is that it provides all of the kind of information that you might need to evaluate different project types and to evaluate different policies and give you some overall findings. So, the idea here would be that in the top left part, a user selects different project details, the kind of building types, the submarkets, however many affordable units they want to put in, the affordability levels, you can make cost adjustments, et cetera. Then you can select whatever policy intervention you're interested in. Tax abatement, again, being predominant here, but there are others. And then once you have made those selections, the model does the calculation and summarizes the financial implications and allows you to compare financial conditions with and without those incentives. We won't do a deep dive into all of the details of how this model works for the time being, but I do think there's some sort of critical things that are worth knowing. For any of these kinds of models, what really matters most are costs and revenues. And costs include things like the cost of land, the cost of labor and materials to build a thing, the costs of fees, the costs of drawings, the consultants that are involved in helping develop your project, et cetera. Revenues mostly refer to the rents. When it comes to a rental side of the housing market, we really care about rents, both market rate rents, what you can get on the free market, and then affordable rents, which are tied to area-wide median income. And then there are a host of other sort of assumptions that have to go into any of these models that have to do with when things are built, when different elements of the project timeline, and other kind of financial things like interest rates and such. The inputs we use here came from a wide variety of sources. Some of them are just local data provided by city staff. Some was just market research into things like what are active market rents. Some of them were from outside paid data services, especially as it relates to construction costs, the detailed construction costs. We used a proprietary service to do that. And then we also, most importantly, I would say, is that there was also a lot of local development community collaboration and input. So we went back and forth with experts in the area, showed them what we had found in our work, got feedback, were willing to make adjustments based on the information that they provided, and I would like to note that there was a lot of very positive, transparent engagement from the local development community in helping to try to make this tool as best it could. And yet, it's still worth noting that all these inputs, they continue to be unique to individual projects and can change with some regularity. Construction costs, we just lived through a period where tariffs would change the price of wood or steel overnight. These things can change with some regularity, even under normal conditions. And so instead of trying to get just the exact right number, we were always really trying to get to kind of reasonable numbers for a typical project. And we'll show you the findings of those typical projects as we go forward here. All right, so I'd like to walk you through like an example of using this tool, the way that I hope that staff will moving forward. So here's an example. Again, here's the user interface. So we've opened it up, and we're going to try and test a new project. So the first thing we'll do is we are going to select our development type. As of now, there are 6 different housing types in here. single-family townhouse, garden apartments, low-rise apartments, mid-rise, and high-rise apartments. You click on one, so here I'm going to click on mid-rise. And you may notice, by the way, that the findings on the right will be sort of changing all of the time. So here, actually, we'll go back. There was the version that was mid-rise tier 1 had a different number than, oh, sorry. Let me go back. So we started with one number, made a change to the mid-rise, and we're getting a new yield number. Then you can select submarkets. So for real estate, we usually talk about submarkets. Oftentimes, we usually mean neighborhoods. It's like a specific, like the costs in Belmont or the costs in Fayetteville, wherever. For our purposes, we decided instead to go effectively with tiers of land and rent costs. So independent of where it is in space within the city, there are definite ranges of costs, both the cost to acquire land or the cost to rent in various parts of the community. And so what we didn't want to be beholden to whatever the cost, saying if we had made this submarket Belmont today, well, perhaps there's some gigantic change that changes the rates there, and then our assumptions about Belmont have changed. And so instead we were doing this sort of agnostic, as it were, or independent of actual locations, instead saying tiers from 1 to 5, where 1 is sort of effectively the most expensive land and the highest rents, and tier 5 would be the least expensive land and the lowest rents. That's what those tiers refer to. So in this case, we'll make a change then to a tier. The next thing we can do is start looking at how many affordable units we want to put into a project. This tool allows right now for you to choose from at least 3 different AMI, area-wide median income bands. So in this case, we're going to choose 10% of the units at 60% AMI. That's the standard for inclusionary zoning. But there's nothing to prevent us from, say, changing it to 25% and just type it in. Or if we said, we actually want to test a mixture, we want to have some that are units that are 60% AMI and some units that are 100% AMI, the tool allows you to do that. So once you have your project inputs, then we can move on to various policies to test. So here we can select, we'll look at the sort of the standard tax abatement, the sort of increment model. We'll switch that from no to yes. We will decide the extent of the abatement. So you can type in 100%. You can also determine the number of years you want the abatement. And then the last thing that you can change is the units abated. So this allows you to either choose it's an abatement on just the affordable units or an abatement on all units. So it's worth noting, of course, the larger the number of units that have some abatement associated with them, the larger the financial impacts therein. But for our purposes today, we really are only ever talking about an abatement on affordable units. And you can, choose a different one. So here now it's like instead of using the increment model, we're doing one with the rent gap model. And in fact, if you scroll down on this user interface, it just didn't fit all sort of on one screen capture. There are more than, there are 6 total policies that we've already just gone ahead and built in. Even if we're not looking at these at the moment, these are sort of standard methods of policy intervention. So we went ahead and put them in, and then this allows you to say, look at multiple things at the same time. What if you had a tax abatement and you gave the land for free, for instance? Okay, so then with that, let's start doing some actual analysis now that we've got this tool built. And there were 4 big questions that we were tasked with answering. 1, what's the feasibility of a typical project today across the city, across building types? Number 2, what does the inclusionary zoning policy do to feasibility? What are the sort of the financial impacts? 3, what would incentives, specifically tax abatement, but others, do to financial feasibility? And 4, what are some of the other trade-offs for the city and the developer as it relates to sort of financial trade-offs? We'll start with the first question, current market feasibility. So what you're looking at here on the right side is our findings on yield on cost and internal rate of return for projects, typical projects across building typologies from townhouse to high-rise, the ones that most likely would be involved in the inclusionary zoning requirement, and across submarkets. In general, this is a color-coded chart. Like if things had high enough feasibility, they would light up green as meaning that they are likely feasible. The typical project in the current housing market would be deemed likely feasible. Yellow would mean that it's possibly feasible, doesn't quite reach the standard thresholds that the private sector is looking at, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't someone who could make that project work, or with small changes that can make that project work. And red is sort of very unlikely, or just at least likely unfeasible for the time being. And you can see that in general, there's a little bit of yellow and a lot of red. And the yellow happens to be in very large projects, especially in those that can command high rents. So important question was, like, how much of this is because of inclusionary zoning? Is the reason things are hard to pencil right now a result of inclusionary zoning? So with that model, we can just strip out the 10% affordable units and run the answers again. And that's what this table shows. From a color scheme perspective, you'll see they look still pretty similar. A few yellows, mostly reds. But comparing the yields and comparing the IRRs, there is absolutely a material difference in what, like, effectively what inclusionary zoning costs from a feasibility perspective. It looks like you want to ask.
Yeah, just a quick question, since we've got a lot of people in the room watching and maybe some at home as well. Could you briefly, in layman's terms, go over the difference between yields and
Yes,
IRR?
happy to. No, and thanks for asking. It's an important question.
Thanks.
So yield on cost is a measure of effectively operating income, how much revenue you're getting once the project is up and running relative to the overall project cost. So it's in some ways a snapshot in time. How much revenue am I getting over how much I had to spend at the beginning to get there? As of now, what is considered likely feasible, again, some of these are very market specific, but for around here, we're looking at needing to approach a 7% number to get to likely feasible. I think technically the threshold was 6.75%. It's sort of tied to your local capitalization rate. IRR, or internal rate of return, is a concept that is more focused on or includes time as one of the components. So yield on cost is just looking, again, it's thinking just like how much money am I getting at some point in the future over how much I paid. But when you get revenues, when you paid costs, certainly plays an important role in whether or not something is feasible, and that's the role that IRR plays. So it's a bit more of a complex kind of calculation, and it generally relates to the discount rate, like the rate of return you would need in order to make the future costs and revenues be equivalent to the net present, it's the net present value of those future revenues. So it's kind of a weirder one to get one's head around, but its benefit is that it is thinking about when things have to get paid. So if you have to put in costs earlier, then that is going to lower your IRR relative to if you had to put in costs later. Or if you get returns earlier, that's going to improve your IRR relative to whether you get those returns later.
What discount rate did you use?
Well, so what this thing actually does is it tells you that's the discount rate that would be needed that's the one that would make these projects net out as zero. So you need to get to,
Okay.
in general, it's something like 18% is the number that would be one that would be likely feasible, and 12% is kind of possibly feasible. And so these, these are the things that get spit out. So ultimately, it's like they're not reaching the numbers that you would like to see in order to make something happen. Effectively, you're not getting enough of a return in order to make this worthwhile. 10% not good enough, negative 2% not good enough. It needs to be higher than that.
Thank you.
So ultimately then, I think what you're seeing here is that even without inclusionary zoning, the market conditions are fairly constrained. And inclusionary zoning does have a material financial effect, which makes perfect sense. It's, instead of having it be a market rate unit, it's an affordable unit, and there's a difference in revenue between the market rate units and the affordable units. So it stands to reason. So with that context then, well, what can tax abatements do? We did model two different types of tax abatements, a traditional value-based abatement and a kind of fairly novel rent gap abatement. The rent gap abatement notably was,
I'm sorry, before you go into
Go back.
is the main reason for the red because of this market, or you find out in most markets, and maybe you said that.
Oh, no, I did not say that. It's a very good question. A lot of this has to do with things outside of the city's control. This is the cost of materials, the cost of labor, the cost of money. These things are very
Okay,
high,
yes, sir.
and rents right now aren't high enough to overcome these changes in costs.
Thank you.
So the two abatement styles of value-based abatement and rent gap abatement. The value-based one is the traditional one, the thing that people are generally accustomed to seeing. What it really is it's effectively taking a reduction on the taxes that are related to the improvement value, i.e. the building itself that's been built. So you still pay taxes on the land as it was before, but you would have some reduction in the amount of taxes you pay on the improvement you made to the property. And such, it relies on assessed property values. That's sort of the mechanism that's used to determine what that abatement would be. A rent gap abatement version, which was brought to our attention actually first by folks at Livable Seaville during one of the sort of stakeholder meetings, is an abatement that is based on the gap between the market rent and the affordable rent. So if there's a unit that the market rent would be $2,500 a month, but a 6% AMI unit, equivalent unit is $1,500 a month, then there is a $1,000 monthly gap, and the abatement relates to that gap. So it's really just focused instead on current market prices. That's what it's relying on. So let's go ahead and dig into the weeds.
Is
some
that
of
essentially like a voucher covering the gap, but then the city just pays it in tax abatement form?
Very similar, yes.
Yeah.
Very similar.
It would seem to me, I haven't done the math, but it would seem to be surprising if the tax abatement would be anywhere near what that rent gap is.
That's a great point. And that's exactly what you're going to see in
Okay.
these next two slides.
Just want to be sure I was.
No, yeah, you're on it. That's great. No, that's great. So this table is showing some of those financials. So the rows are showing larger and larger percentages of what can be abated, whereas the columns are different financial evaluations of that abatement. So the first two are yields and IRR, and you can see that as you increase the abatement, you have a larger sort of change in yields. In this case, we're looking specifically at a typical mid-rise project that's in a Tier 3 area, which means it's like 135 units or thereabouts. It's around $2,500 a month. On average for rents, these buildings all assume kind of a various unit mix, which can be changed by the user if they want. But you can see then that there's just increasing financial benefits for yield and IRR the larger the abatement. But I think what's notable also are these next four columns. The third one looks at effectively the owner, the developer, whomever has this property, the financial loss that comes from an affordable unit. So in this case, with 10% units, so we'll say 14 units are affordable. It's about $1,000 a month difference between the market rate rent and the affordable rent. So with inclusionary zoning requirement, this effectively costs the owner $13,000 a month in revenue. An abatement, though, is some kind of return on that, and that's in column 4. But you should note here that under the sort of traditional method, when we're only abating the affordable units, which again isn't the only way you can do an abatement, but if we're only abating the affordable units, that you never really get anywhere close to a return that's equivalent to the inclusionary zoning costs. So just a note, that you can do with that information what you'd like, but I do think it's interesting and informative.
Can
Another
you
way
say
to
that
look
again?
Sure, that with the traditional tax abatement on affordable units, the abatement itself, the amount of money you get back, never approaches the amount of money that's lost by making these units affordable and requiring them to be affordable.
So the $13,636 it costs the owner of the building to subsidize these apartments gets paid back by the city in the fourth column, so there's always a gap.
Correct.
And so the financial incentive for the owner of the building there isn't one.
You would expect it to be fairly limited under this specific
model.
This specific model, that's right? Yeah. That's But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you've gone ahead and gone down this path, that there isn't some amount of money that's coming out of the city's coffers in the future. And depending on how you look at this information, you can either think of that as this is effectively revenue that is waived by the city, which can be the equivalent of more than $50,000 a year under this situation.
How
But you
is
can
that
also
number calculated? Is it calculated from any of the data points on this?
no, you're not seeing the amount that's coming. Yeah, we have to calculate the improvement value component for taxes, and then abate a percentage of that portion. Yeah. So it's a little behind there, but it's all in the model and can be seen transparently. It's just the calculation.
But then the other way to think about it is, let's say there was a smaller building or something else that was there that wasn't earning this level of tax revenue. So yes, potentially we could have made, $540,000 in tax revenue. We're only making 527, but before we were only getting 25.
Yeah, so or
So
potentially
we're
zero.
still ahead.
Mhm, that's right.
Yeah.
And so you can think of this as waiving. You can think of it as investing. You can think of it as you've created something that has new tax revenue, and you could think of it as, well, it's less new tax revenue. And like it's, ultimately there's sort of no one right way to look at this, but I think it helps to consider all sides.
Instead of looking at it as a difference between 5 and 10, you look at it as a difference between 0 and 5.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks.
So let's do the same exercise now with the rent gap method. And as noted previously, the impacts here are much larger.
Just before we leave this
Oh,
last
yeah.
chart, I'm thinking that the math works out so that the last two columns, if you add them together for each row, they're the same.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Normally in a graph like this, I sort of expect the bottom right-hand answer to be the thing I'm supposed to act on the basis of. What is it in that last column that I'm supposed to be looking at and saying, oh, that's dispositive?
Oh, I would say each of these is independently interesting. You could almost imagine this as 6 separate tables all lumped together. There are different ways of looking at what the financial implications are of this abatement. No one is sort of more right than the other. No one is more necessarily, to me, more powerful than another. They're just different ways of looking at this same issue of what does it mean to provide a tax abatement.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So here's that same table now under the rent gap method. And I think maybe the most critical part to notice here, of course, is that for a rent gap method, if you were to say have a rent gap abatement of 100%, it effectively means you are reimbursing the entire amount of the loss as a result of that affordable unit. So you can see in row 4, column 4, $13,636 is returned in the abatement, which matches the loss, or in any combination therein. But with the same sort of effective abatement percentage, you're seeing much larger financial impacts, both to IRR and to revenue waived or invested, or to new tax revenue. It's worth talking a little bit about the pros and cons of these two methods. The value-based method, maybe its primary pro is that it's a tried and true method. There are lots of other people who have done it before. If you were to begin the process of writing the policy, administering the policy, there'd be lots of sort of best practices you could look to, and that's got its merits. And again, it is worth noting that while we only looked at an abatement, a traditional abatement on affordable units, you could look at an abatement on the entire project. There's nothing to prevent you from doing that. The cons are that, again, as currently constructed, it never really closes a current market gap. And in this case, sort of as noted, it probably doesn't encourage a lot of development in difficult market conditions. If you can't make a project sort of pencil out a baseline anyway, and you're not giving them all the money back, you're probably not really stimulating the market in any serious way. For the rent gap method, the pros are its direct addressing of the financial loss associated with the inclusionary zoning. It's sort of like, we recognize as a city this was important to us, we need you to help build this stuff, but we will reimburse you, and we're just tying it to that number. And because of its larger financial impacts, it may be more appealing in more difficult financial conditions. It may be one that moves the needle more often. But the cons exist too, in that it's rarely used. Baltimore was the only example we found, and that's still relatively new. They're dealing with the same macroeconomic market conditions, so they've not had a large infusion of projects that we can show this is working great. So I think there are definitely some administrative unknowns that still exist. So I think that's worth saying, despite all of the myriad benefits of a rent gap method. And then just for tax abatements on the whole, I think it's probably just worth making these notes. That regardless of what abatement one were to choose, the possibility absolutely exists that you provide financial benefit in a way that makes new housing happen. Like absolutely the case that can happen with the right abatement in the right market. It's also the case that for any abatement, this risk exists that they're not sufficient to stimulate development during down market conditions, and may well be the kind of thing that just helps to facilitate stronger market conditions in situations where, in fact, you could even be providing an abatement to a project that would have been built even without it. That just does exist. And to that end, we also looked at some other kinds of incentives as well. We didn't go into a lot of detail with this, but we thought it was important as part of this leave behind to be looking at some other things like gap financing or land provision. Lots of communities deal with timeline delays. That's not the case here in Charlottesville, so I don't think you'd have to focus on that one too much, but loans. And just doing some real basic things. You can see that each of them has sort of various levels of impacts. But again, you're never seeing anything, even when you're talking about fairly large financial allocations, you don't necessarily see gigantic leaps in some of the numbers that matter, but they're still positive, they still matter. And so, this tool can continue to help you explore some of this stuff as you move forward if there are other options that you're interested in. So with that, final slide, just to say, let's look back at some of the key findings again, and happy to answer any other questions you might have here. So, point one, as of today, market conditions are challenging for private sector housing development. And from a financial perspective, inclusionary zoning adds to that challenge. It's pretty clear that traditional tax abatements can help, but that, at least again, as of today, you might say that alone they are currently inefficient or insufficient, and that they may be fairly small. This rent gap tax abatement method, I think, does merit some further consideration as sort of a better connection between private sector decision-making and public sector decision-making. That other incentives or policies may still be needed regardless, either now or in the future. And as such, our hope is that this leave-behind tool that staff can now use in perpetuity can allow for sort of future exploration, adaptation, improvement over time. With that, I'll just leave you with contact information if anybody ever needs to reach out. But thank you for the time, and I hope this has been useful to all of you.
Thank you. So, I'm sure we have some questions. I'll start with you, Natalie.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll start with a little out of order from the notes I have, but since you just mentioned it on one of those last slides, let me scroll back to it. The potential for the risk that the city has to provide a tax abatement to a project that could have been built without it. But then one of the features of the rent gap abatement is that is kind of adaptive to market pressures, right?
Indeed.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, no, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think maybe without any further comment, that the hope of the rent gap method would be that it would help to alleviate those sorts of issues. Though it probably would require situations where the market rate and the affordable rate are very close together, and in Charlottesville that seems fairly unlikely. So there's probably always going to be some kind of legitimate market gap that does make it difficult for a project to work without it. And then in cases where there's a very robust market, then you would go along and build this project regardless, but there'd still be a gap between market rate and affordable rents, and then you could ask for that that
Sure,
money back, yeah.
Sure. Okay, cool. But it is more attentive to market pressures than the other model.
It is absolutely more attentive to market pressures. That's exactly right. And that's one of its primary benefits.
So it was good looking at the report and reading the values that you included in the tool, and I was trying to think, like, are there any that I would have added? Not really, but we didn't have a link to play with that on our own.
Oh, sorry.
But one of the questions that I had was, what if you had used fewer units? Because all of them started at 10%, but like, what is I know it already doesn't pencil out with no units, but like, how much further away would it be if it was 5 or something? So I think it'd be fun if we were able to play with that a little bit on our own.
And you are.
Okay,
Absolutely. allowed to,
great.
yeah.
Thanks. And then there was the legislative issue that was noted in the report that said, an important caveat about tax abatement in Virginia is that a state code does not allow abatement of taxes to private entities for affordable housing development. So, as you mentioned, they would have to pay their full taxes, and then we grant them back this amount. Why is that? And is that something that we need to put on our legislative agenda to try and get them to change, or is it just like, fine to leave as is?
It's not that you can't work around it. I imagine it just is a bit of an administrative complexity, but there are plenty of communities in Virginia that employ abatements of some form or fashion, and so I don't think it necessarily has to be changed.
So it might not be worth going to the General Assembly?
So, our Commissioner of Revenue has some.
Yeah.
There's a
Todd.
bill that's probably going to pass that is kind of loosening some of that up, that would allow for-profit entities to merge with nonprofits in a more amiable way to do some of this.
Okay.
I don't have a bill number for that.
Okay, cool. Thanks. And then,
While you're looking, I can tell you just inform the tool itself is available on the city's website.
oh, fab. Okay, great. Thank you.
Where?
On the housing section? Housing program, NDS, and NDS.
Okay, and the comps that were listed included Minneapolis, Columbus, and Baltimore. Each of them had a slightly different situation. With Minneapolis providing a 10-year affordability requirement, whereas Charlottesville provides 99. Columbus waived all improvement taxes, not just on affordable units, I believe. And then Baltimore does the rent difference. Were you able to get a sense of how long the requirement is in other areas beyond just Minneapolis's 10? Is 99 out there? Is 99 normal? How does that affect the
Well,
penciling out?
without having done like a comprehensive look at all of the abatements, this is the first place I have seen with a 99-year abatement requirement.
Which makes it harder to pencil out as well. Yeah. And then, okay, so the land, this is just a thing to clarify for the explanation. The land provision, does this mean that the seller artificially deflates the land value for the sale? Is that what that alternative?
Oh, no, sorry, I just.
What does that mean?
It just means, like, suppose you had access to land and you gave it to somebody for free or at a discounted rate, so the land, instead of assuming that the land cost is generally equivalent to whatever the assessed land value is, we're going to assume it's discounted by some percent by the person who sells the land
Okay,
to
yeah,
them.
so the seller would.
That's all, yeah.
So the subsidies are coming from somewhere.
Subsidies are coming from somewhere, correct.
And then I've got a question more for the city, which is one of the things you noted that had a pretty high IRR return adjustment was a reduced review and approval speed. So what would the city need to get it faster? Is it personnel? Is it software? Is it just changing the timeline?
I would like to have somebody step up and at least corroborate this, but to my understanding, Charlottesville is beholden to, I think, a state regulation for how fast they have to review processes. And so there's honestly not much additional benefit in reduced timelines. It's a common concern across the country, which is why we put it in. In fact, we kind of put it in even before we heard about this rule. And so I'd say you could, in some ways, ignore it for the time being. There's always a risk in continued back and forth between the submitter of a plan and the approver of the plan, but there are lots of different reasons that projects sort of don't get approved, and yeah, that's, I think, beyond the purview of a tool like this, at least.
Okay, thanks. Those were the, I saw a thumbs up, thanks, Kelly. Those were the questions I had, but there are a couple points that I wanted to emphasize. Really, the way the gap financing works is what we kind of talked about earlier, is such that while we are not maximizing our tax revenue because we are foregoing some of it, we are still getting more than we would have gotten before, which we then can use for all the other projects and things that we want to do. And as you mentioned, that the gap between market rate and dedicated affordable units is far, but the more we build, perhaps it will get closer. It might not ever get there, but it might. And I know that frustrates a lot of people who don't want, who think that the only building we should allow is dedicated affordable, or that market rate isn't good enough, or doesn't make a big enough impact. And it absolutely doesn't until it does. But if it takes that 50th building to get to that even out space, or the tipping point, you can't get to that 50th building without 1 through 49. And so I think that's just something that's good to remember in general, that we are so far behind that it's going to take a while to get to the point where we see that naturally occurring difference, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't work to get there on the way. Okay, I know we don't have all the time in the world, so I'll let somebody else go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lloyd, you have any comments?
Yeah, it appears, as I'm sort of looking at the page where you've got, it's page 65 in our packet, one about, we didn't quite get there in what you had, but there's other potential incentives, that there are basically 3 different incentives: gap financing, land provision, and forgivable loan, that are mentioned. And if we were to do all of them at a cost of roughly $4.5 million for this 135 unit mid-rise tier 3 development, that would amount to a subsidy of $35,000 per unit, whether affordable or not. In other words, that we don't get to and at that point we get into the yellow range, but don't even get to the green range. That we're so far behind that even market rate units don't pencil out.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look around town as evidence of like what things work and what don't right now, and you're probably not seeing a lot of these lower density kinds of buildings. That's just because of the underlying market dynamics, though those change.
Yeah.
There are periods of time when they work and periods of times they don't.
How stable over time are these input costs? I remember, for the last 4 or 5 years, I remember when we started on this, when I started on council in 2020, we were being struck by what seemed to be an inordinate rise in the cost of 2x4s. It's never gone down. It's only gone up from that inordinate rise. Yeah. I'm just wondering if the input costs of basically building materials and labor costs and land costs are not going to go down, and I think we should, at least in the short to medium term, figure that that's true, and that there's very little that we're going to be able to do to change any of them because they are larger market forces than we can control or even influence much. What can we influence?
Oh, well, I think where you're influencing is on the margins. There's still plenty of people, when we worked with stakeholders across the city, there's still a lot of interest in tax abatements and belief that these kinds of things can help move the needle. It wouldn't necessarily make every project work, but it can still make, a goodly number of projects work, maybe even during these kinds of constrained environments, and maybe, particular kinds of projects, and not the wide array of housing types that perhaps we would envision in sort of an ideal situation. But there's no reason not to continue to sort of try and be party to helping to solve this, this housing problem. But it's definitely the case that costs right now, relative to revenues and to, to incomes, we're at a challenging time from a macroeconomic perspective. And it's just all the more reason why it's likely the case that cities need to become more involved in this process in order to overcome these underlying conditions.
Well, I can't help but think of John Maynard Keynes' wisdom that the markets can remain irrational longer than I can remain solvent. And my fear is that we have seen these costs go up and not come down, and they have created at this point a stable base of costs that are almost out of the range of our ability to solve that problem, both for affordable units and market units, and that the only way we're going to be able to do anything is likely to be a significant cash subsidy up front, whatever form it may take, that because of the way time factors into the IRR, that ends up helping out in a whole lot of ways. But that we would even have to do that as to market rate units just to get market rate units built.
It's a possibility. I think I would say probably that more now than ever, doing nothing is not going to work. But beyond that, it's for others to decide. Yeah, but there's no question this is a challenging development environment, specifically for new housing.
Is there any, another aphorism, hope is not a strategy. Is there any real prospect that those input costs are going to go down anytime soon?
Well, I don't know. So, I really couldn't say what's going to happen to costs, but it's certainly the case that revenues can change independent of costs. Part of what the issue here has been an increased disconnect between costs and wages, what can be paid by rent, and those two things are not necessarily tied hand in hand. So it may be that while the cost considerations look to be long-term concerns, there are opportunities for changes on the wages side as well. That can help mitigate. But yeah, I don't want to minimize your concerns. I think they're legitimate. And this is part of why this is a national conversation, not a Charlottesville conversation, is that everybody's trying to figure out these pretty large questions.
And so the only answer you seem to be suggesting is higher wages for our residents.
Or lower tax rates.
I think I would just suggest that any opportunities to change the cost-revenue mismatches could have a material benefit to the extent that that's an important goal of council. But I certainly would say I have no particular recommendation here. This is meant to just be informative, and happy to answer any of these questions. But yeah, I'll defer to all of you on the recommendations.
Michael, you want to chime in?
So it sounds like, did you look at student housing as a specific submarket as part of this analysis?
When we started, we decided not to look at student housing at the time because I don't believe that they were subject to inclusionary zoning requirements. And I think maybe it's as an in lieu fee instead. But we just didn't, ultimately they weren't part of this. It is not a significant lift to add student housing or co-housing It doesn't have to be students, it's just, the co-housing model, there's nothing to prevent us from adding that into the tool very easily.
Yeah. And they are subject to inclusionary zoning, just a different policy
Oh, sorry,
than
okay.
student housing. But I think for this to be as actionable as possible, we're going to have to. An easy way to do that could just be break down rent by the bedroom. But, because I believe in our market, it can be twice as profitable per square foot. So basically, I think this is underestimating how feasible student housing development is.
100%.
And actually making things look even more optimistic for high-rise development, because it's kind of capturing in that significantly more profitable submarket. So I just-
So for what it's worth, we didn't include any co-housing styles into our rental assumptions about high-rise. So they really were always meant to be like a 3-bedroom apartment by one household. We didn't look at it as, say, a unit where it's rented by the bedroom and there are 4 bedrooms in it.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, there's no question that there are much higher revenues available in those situations, especially when you have a captive, high-wage audience like the student housing projects do today. Yeah, I mean, you could, if you wanted to, I think fairly easily, you can, one of the little toggles in the project input area is just changing, you can move construction or revenues or land costs from standard to high or low. And if you just move rents to high, which would be, a decent substitute, you get green projects in that sort of tier 1 high-rise area, and that's a pretty good standard for student housing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good that it's not making things look more optimistic for high-rise, because it's not very optimistic as is. But I guess the concern would be if we do move to a tax abatement program, it probably makes sense to think about student housing as a distinct kind of housing type as part of that, just because it's going to have fundamentally different kind of economic assumptions in it. And I mean, that's kind of what we see. Student housing for high-rise works, and there's multiple projects doing that, but it's only student housing. Was there any looking at other localities that have done something like pairing this program with vouchers, which would provide even more subsidy for the unit, but also allow for even deeper affordability impacts?
So I have not done that work, but some of the places we've done this work in have taken that upon themselves. Charleston, South Carolina is one that comes to mind, that is sort of using this tool or a version of this the same concept in their work.
Yeah, I obviously think that would be, if it's feasible, extremely powerful, because again, it'll just be cover even more of that rent gap for the owners, as well as bring AMIs for the residents down further. Was it Richmond that explored and implemented a tax abatement program, and what were their impacts from it, just as kind of a comparison of how it worked in their local housing market?
I actually don't know the answer to that, but happy to sort of look into it and report back later.
Good evening, councilors. I'm Alan Pure. I was actually the project lead for this. Councilor Payne, the last I looked at Richmond, they had not had any projects roll out, excuse me, from their performance grant program. And just to make it clear, they use the traditional base increment model, and they only abate towards the affordable units. They only provide an abatement against the percentage of a development that is affordable units. And the last time I looked, which was a couple of months ago, they had not had any projects take advantage yet. And I can only speculate that it has to do with the same market headwinds that we're talking about here.
And would kind of an accurate summary of the IRI results provided here being, with the caveats that this is looking at our current market right now, that inclusionary zoning obviously has a trade-off, so there's an impact on IRR there, but even if we completely eliminated inclusionary zoning, we would not expect a change in the amount of new units developed
Yes, I'd say as it relates to new housing development, I think I would say inclusionary zoning, for the purposes of just getting something built, inclusionary zoning is a problem, not the problem. Is that a fair, maybe a fair way
Right.
to put that, yeah.
It's one of many marginal constraints, but it's not the primary constraint that is stopping development.
Correct, yes.
Charles.
If it were eliminated today, I do not believe you would see a sizable change in all market conditions. Yeah.
And along with that, it's interesting that the only area where possibly feasible with or without inclusionary zoning or with a tax abatement is for high-rise construction. In the mid-rise, low-rise townhouse garden apartment is like not even close to potentially feasible. And would it be accurate that, the reason the IRR is, it wouldn't spur new constructions because rents aren't high enough from the perspective of investors?
Yeah, and it just seems that costs are very high. I would still anticipate, though, that there are probably some kinds of specific projects and specific places that will still work. But yeah, that seems, at least from a typical perspective, yeah, they're pretty far away from the thresholds needed today. I know that in the past there's been work looking at some of this, and at the time, even 2 or 3 years ago, that threshold for feasibility was a lower number than it is today. And some of those were pretty close to feasibility. Those numbers would have looked pretty good a few years ago, and now they just don't. So yeah, which again reflects costs, not just of materials and labor, but I think also just the cost of money, which has changed pretty dramatically over the last few years.
And it's accurate. It's not because these projects aren't generating a profit. It's because the profit is not high enough to make it a rational investment for an investor to give them the capital.
Right. On the whole, if an IRR is greater than 0, then it theoretically has some kind of return. But yeah, why would you go through the effort of building a building when you could leave it in a savings bond?
Right.
Yeah. Make more.
And this is a staff question. Granted, these are current market conditions and they could change, but under current market conditions, this program would not have any impact on increasing, or a very small impact on increasing new development, which is fine if we create it because market conditions can change. But is there a sense of the amount of staff capacity this would take? Like how many staff positions? Is this kind of an easy lift? Is this extremely difficult?
So I think the short answer is that we really haven't conducted that assessment yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, well, I'll say I do think inclusionary zoning is a positive thing, but it has to be designed well. One way I look at it is kind of like a transfer tax. It's taking housing opportunities that would only go to upwardly mobile professionals, to people at 50, 60% of AMI and below. But it has to be designed well. If we have a program that's stopping all development, terrible trade-off. If, as just a theoretical example, over 10 years it suppressed 100 market rate units, but you got $40 million for 0 to 50% AMI housing, that would be a good trade-off in my mind. Obviously, hard to know you're getting it perfectly right, but looking at the national models from Grounded Solutions, who keeps a national database, we follow a lot of the best practices in terms of, compared to localities where it's gone very poorly, our AMI requirement is lower, the percentage of units is lower, we have a payment in lieu option, we don't have strict requirements on unit types or unit size, and we paired it with substantial upzoning, which many localities didn't upzone at all when they created inclusionary zoning. But it's true that tax abatements are one of the models that they show many localities do. So I think it's not necessarily negative to pursue. I guess the question to me is, what is the trade-off of, if it's an easy lift for staff, no problem. If this is an extremely difficult, expensive lift, and this has no impact on increasing new development, what does that trade-off look like?
I think I'll just say for the moment that we would really need to assess, kind of based on where we want to go in terms of how this sort of program would be applied from a policy perspective, what it would take to support that from a staff perspective. We do not currently have anyone that would be able to dedicate time to this as part of there's no additional capacity, let me put it that way.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the main trade-offs I'm thinking of is the juice versus the squeeze compared to other policies we can pursue, even if the goal was just increasing new market rate construction. And I think I just wonder if in some ways we're kind of barking up the wrong tree in terms of everyone's going to be dissatisfied because we're not going to get the outcomes we want from this, and we'd have a much bigger impact looking at access to capital and providing capital that is willing to accept a lower rate of return. I don't know if we need to do that regionally to have the scale for it to be effective, or look to legislative packet, advocate for the states to make changes along those lines. But I think that is going to have a much more transformative impact, even if our goal is just new market rate units, especially for the mid-low rise. But again, I do think the inclusionary zoning program is good because it is providing housing opportunities for people at 0 to 50% AMI, and that is a tough part of the market to reach. The market on its own, at least with filtering over decades, maybe could reach them, but the immediate impact won't be there. So I do think it's positive, and I hope we don't make inclusionary zoning a boogeyman that's blamed for the reason there's not a lot of new development, because if we eliminated it or greatly reduced it, you're talking about an impact of a loss of potentially tens and millions of dollars that could go to poor and working class people in the city. But I do appreciate this analysis. I think it's important, and I think it's really important to look at our local market conditions.
Thank you. Jen?
Yeah, thank you for this report. This has been very helpful. I think what I'm hearing is it's not a one-trick pony. I mean, it has to be this multiple incentives and interventions. Can that occur in, although Kelly, just plug your ears about the administrative lift this would be, but like the, you're doing a traditional or a rent gap abatement for the affordable units, but then you apply those incentives or interventions to the other units that are more along the lines of, you know, the faster timelines or the, you know, any of the other things you recommended. Do people do that?
You mean like do they combine these incentives?
Combine?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All together, okay.
Certainly. I mean, I think you may have heard in the past, for those who are focused on like affordable housing development, they sort of talk about the capital stack. They're talking about all the various places money has to come from. This is a sort of very similar thing. We need multiple places to make projects work when the rents are far below the costs, and that's what's happening right now in affordable housing. Well, that's what's happening now in affordable housing that goes in brand new construction. I will say that.
Right, not.
And there are other units out there in the world. that
Yeah,
that's great.
recrafting existing units or, redeveloping. And so, you mentioned the tiers that, like, instead of having the tool use the neighborhoods, you kind of tiered it out. So should abatements vary by location and housing type? I mean, or do you just does the tool use a blanket?
So that really, I think that answer depends on what your personal priorities are. If it may be that getting an affordable unit anywhere in the city, in your minds, is functionally equivalent. Doesn't matter where it is, it's good and we'll take it. It may be that units in specific places in the city are better than others. And in those situations, then yeah, I would imagine there's nothing to prevent you from having an abatement that has a location component, for sure. And I think it really just depends on the community's priorities, with the recognition of what, you know, the sort of relative power of this particular tool is.
And my last question is just dreaming. The tool can't possibly have an input that's like, if we invested instead of to wages and incentivizing wages, then it magically shows us what happens if we spend our money there.
It can't now, but if there were a change in area-wide median income, that would change the affordable rent. Right? I mean, and so if that was something that you want right now, there's a part in the tool that has to list what area-wide median income is, and if that number changed, yeah, I mean, it's kind of the fun of tool like this, is playing around with those kinds of things, and ultimately is a little bit of why we even went ahead and looked at some sort of, modest examples of other kinds of provisions. You can see they have different orders of magnitude effects, even if it's the same amount of money. So like time, what time matters most. There's definitely communities that we've worked in where there were parts of town where providing land, but if the city provided land, it was an enormous boon for a development, whereas other parts of that town, it had almost no material difference. If that becomes the case in Charlottesville, well then, land acquisition is a really strong use of your money. Truth be told, I think because of the inherent complexities of housing right now, being flexible and adaptable in the tools that you want to provide is probably a pretty advisable direction to go in. None of these on their own is necessarily sufficient, but it may well be that all of them in some ways are necessary.
And the rent gap version really kind of regulates itself because it's so tied to the market at the moment. But if you chose the more traditional method, is calibration built in? So you're constantly adjusting.
It's still based on the assessed value, and that assessed value should have some connection to market conditions. It's just not such a direct. You could imagine someone saying, I have this unit, I know I could rent it and prove I could rent it for $2,500 a month, and you're asking me to rent it for $1,500 a month. I'd like to be in the program, and you're like, that sounds good. We know it's $1,000. Here it is. just a very transparent kind of way of abating the difference. And I think the assessed value is just a little bit more complex for folks.
Can I interrupt
I'm
real
done.
quick? Is that something that we could apply to smaller developments? Like in a duplex, could we say, oh, I could rent this for $2,200, I want to rent it for $1,800, will the city abate me that much? Is that something we could apply to like a small situation?
Is it something you could apply in a small situation? Right now, the inclusionary zoning requirement is for projects of
Pretty big
10
stuff,
units or more.
yeah.
You could have picked 100 units, you could have picked 2. I think it's the same kind of thing here. If that's the direction that you would want to go with a rent gap abatement program, there's really nothing, in theory, there's nothing to prevent that kind of thing from happening, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Opening it up to existing projects, it's all sort of all open there, and that I think would be,
Yeah.
if you were to explore a rent gap method, I think those are the kinds of things you'd want to be looking into, making sure about, are there legal ramifications, are there administrative ramifications, but I personally, if this was SimCity and I was doing it myself, I would be very intrigued by that kind of concept, by its flexibility.
So it's been, I'm sorry, sir.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Oshrin, if I could just put your idea, though, back into the concept of Virginia statute, which means we have to do this within the context of a performance grant process.
Yes.
And so doing this on kind of a very small scale gets a little complicated if you have to put
More
it within
admin.
that context of it's a performance grant, et cetera. So just one constraint to factor into that idea.
Got it. Yep, okay, I appreciate that, thank you.
So my colleagues asked a lot of questions. So, based on your experience, is there a city that has the right recipe that you feel that's done? And I know every locality is different.
I think that's a really hard, it's ultimately going to be much more about your own city's context than it is about, Toledo nailed it or something. It's not really the case. Sorry, those who have affinity for Toledo, I didn't mean to throw you under the bus. But yeah, I think it's so dependent on your market conditions. I think the ones in general, the more flexible you are and the more opportunities you have for intervening in your market, the better. There's some places where they saw great success with abatements, but the goal was just any kind of new housing. But so it depends on your goal.
Right. So
Sorry, it's not a great answer.
No. I want to visit Toledo now.
It just depends.
So. So this, I don't know if this is for you.
I spent a week there one afternoon.
I don't know if this is for you, it's just a comment, but I remember when we were doing the zoning ordinance, we talked about like the time period, and that we talked about 10, 15, 20 years, that can go by pretty quickly, and that's why, generally speaking, we came up with like, the 99 years. Sound like we're the only one that has that length.
I'm sure you're not the only one, but it's the only one that I've.
It's not a lot. It's not like, anyway, that's something that, we're gonna have to look at. So, Sam, what's the next steps? Kelly, what's
Okay, so the next steps are to go back and listen to all the questions you asked us, so we can think about how that might inform the development of some options, some recommendations, to bring to you for your consideration at a future meeting.
Okay. Thank you. And you have a lot, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, other,
Oh, I was just saying, you're
Yeah,
late for
but
your
what-
next presentation.
well,
Yeah.
one more. Just want to make sure this is
Sorry.
pretty big. If there's
Yep.
any other comments from councils.
A lot more work to do, but
Yeah.
Thank you for the great
Yeah.
job so far.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. The next item we're going to listen is the update on the West Haven redevelopment project. John will be doing that.
Hello, how's it going?
Great, sir.
I do have a presentation that was sent over.
I'm sure they're bringing it up right now.
Okay. Well, I'll go and get started. We don't have much time. So the initial slide is about the history of West Haven. So West Haven is the oldest and largest public housing community in the city of Charlottesville. Has 126 units on 9.9 acres. It was constructed in 1964 with very limited renovations since construction. It has 126 units. 20 of those units are one-bedroom units, 35 are two-bedroom, 49 three, 15 four-bedrooms,
John,
and 7.
I'm sorry, are you pressing, it's
think
advancing.
so.
It may have been pressed. Sorry.
Thank you. Now we can go. So on the screen is a layout of the current West Haven site with its boundary lines identified. So it backs up towards Main Street, has some frontage on 10th Street, frontage on 8th Street, and a little bit of frontage on Page Street. On the screen is a historic view of the site before it was West Haven. And so I wanted to bring this up because we're going to be looking to make some connections. This is a diagram of the accessibility of West Haven. So currently, the only accessible route to get to the bus stop on Main Street is going through the tunnel under 8th Street by Jenkins Park and coming up around. We currently have a set of steps, but if you can't go through the steps that are beside the standard, then the only other way is around. It's double the size, the length to get to that bus stop if you can't make those steps. So the resident planners have been planning the West Haven site for about 3 years now. They initially came together, and it's about 30 residents that meet every other week, and they created goals for their redevelopment. And so those goals are improving the health and safety of the community, recognizing the memory and history and honoring that, balancing density and livability, cultivating community, and making urban connections. So we'll talk about each one of those and how the site, the current site, or the new site, takes those things into heart. All right, so health and safety, we knew we needed more units because we have a lot of families that need housing, and so we're going to be looking at a larger site. So we wanted to make sure we're addressing traffic calming, flood mitigation, trash removal, security, and sustainability. And so the residents looked at site lighting, trash pickup opportunities, security points, visibility, traffic calming, and sustainability, of course. Memory and history. And so this is going to include public memorials, art and murals, and placemaking. And so we went to the Public Housing Art Museum in Chicago, And we're going to be looking at working with them to identify some areas where we can do some memory and history in art presentations, public art, to make sure that the residents that live in the site 20 years from now know how West Haven got here and all the work that folks did to make that happen. Balancing density and livability. So everyone knows there's a huge problem here. We have to build more units. But the units we build must be livable. The residents on that site have to have green spaces, adequate trees, playground spaces, adequate parking, addressing stormwater management. As you build more larger buildings, we're taking those things into account. And so as you're going to see on this site, the residents were really intentional when it came to placements of buildings. Larger buildings are backing up to larger buildings, and the site drops down as you get to more of neighborhood style homes. Cultivating community. So the site has 126 units. We have 9 different spoken languages at our site. And so we want to make sure that everyone is heard and everyone has opportunities after the site is redeveloped. And so we're looking at a lot of open spaces, multi-generational play spaces, walking trails, garden spaces, pocket parks, and indoor community spaces. Urban connection. And so West Haven, like I said, like I showed on like the third slide, the accessibility, it's really hard to get to Main Street if you cannot go up the steps. And so with this redevelopment, we're actually adding some switchbacks on the hill in between the apartment buildings, which will make it possible for anyone to get to Main Street without having to go through the tunnel and go up and around to get to that bus stop on Main Street. And so we'll look at a little bit more of those, but that's right in between the 2 buildings, the sidewalk switchback, and it will come up between the standard and the proposed LV Collective building. So this is the site plan. It's 140 units. 140 apartment units is 102 townhouse units, which are the white rectangles. A lot of them are stacked townhouses. And then there's a multi-use building, which is currently planned as a recreational center with SRO, single occupancy units above. So the max build out, I think, is 260 units. And so that connection that we're talking about making to Main Street actually lines up perfectly with Cox's Alley, which was an historic street before the site was developed. And so we're looking to honor that connection and actually make it so it's actually used. Currently, there's a stair connection there now that goes from stairs to grass to like a sidewalk by the standard. It's not very inviting, and so we're going to be opening that up. We're working with the resident planners on what that will look like, and also LV Collective would play a role in that as well because they are the landowner on the Main Street side. This chart also talks about the density and how we're stepping back from the high density towards the student housing properties, which are on Main Street. And as you get back to Page Street, those properties step down traditional 2-story with a basement unit, which is very similar to what the property will look like now. And so this is a breakdown of all the different types of units and amenity spaces in those buildings. So the first 2 buildings on those in our phase are the apartment buildings. There's a senior apartment building that has 68 1-bedroom units and 8 2-bedroom units. That is slated to be constructed in phase 1A. Also, you'll see on that building, right beside that building is an apartment building for families. That is also slated to be in the first phase, but 1B. We're looking at tackling the projects in a hybrid tax credit deal. The first phase will be a 9% LIHTC deal, and the second phase will be a 4%, which is why we're splitting them. It really is the only feasible way to make this project happen without a whole lot more money coming from a lot of different sources.
What makes it a senior building?
We're going to restrict it by age, but it won't just be seniors, it'll actually be seniors and disabled. We've called it seniors because that's mainly who lives in our.
So there'll be accessibility differences with the spaces within the building?
Correct.
Got it. And is there a reason why they're all in one building and not spread out between the two buildings?
No, but one reason, I think we've done that in the past, I think it's just been a little bit more successful when it comes to management of those spaces. But I don't think there was any other particular reason residents wanted two separate buildings.
Okay.
What else the townhouses are currently not planned in the first phase. There is a high cost to building low-income housing tax credit units. So we're looking at ways to build those to build those townhouse units without using tax credit. We're estimating that's an additional $150,000 per unit based upon doing it under LIHTC. And so we could not find another option for the apartment buildings, but we are looking for other options for the townhouse units on the site.
What was that, 150,000?
$150,000 per unit to cost, and so we're using special doors, using special windows.
Well, using LIHTC, you have to.
We have to hit certain benchmarks for energy efficiency, and so the cost of construction is a lot higher. All right, and so this is going to break down the phases. So this is phase 1A, 76 total units, 68 one-bedroom, 8 two-bedrooms, 5,000 square feet of health clinic space. It does have structured parking, has a fitness center, resident lounge on each floor. Estimated construction cost is $44.3 million. The city requests, what we're requesting from the city is $8 million for this phase of the project. These are the financials, and you can't really see them on the screen. You should be able to see them better in your packet. There's $16.1 million in low-income housing tax credit equity. There's $27.5 million in permanent financing, and the tax credit is at 81 cents per credit. All the units in this development will be available for 30% AMI and lower. We're going to project-based voucher assistance to those units, so the Housing Authority will still be able to collect close to market rate rents, but we'll be able to assist families at 0 to 30% AMI. All right, so phase 1B, multi-family building, 64 total units, has a dedicated teen center, dedicated leasing center, a computer room, ample resident space. It also has structured parking. The estimated construction cost is $37.1 million, and our request from the city for this phase is $7 million. For the
John, could I stop you? When you say 1A, 1B, is that just simply representing the fact that there are two pieces to the same phase? They're going to be done more or less simultaneously?
So they are going to be done simultaneously, and that's because we're trying to look for a great economy scale to reduce price. But they have to be done separated because they're going to have separate owners. One's going to have a 9% deal, which is going to have a one ownership group, and then there's going to be a 4% deal, which will have a separate ownership group. So they have to be separated.
Yeah, okay.
For 1B, which is a 4% deal, there is two different tax credits that we're going after. We're going after the Virginia Housing Opportunity Tax Credit, which will give us $5.4 million, and those are sold at 55 cents a credit. Then there's $14.9 million from the 4% tax credit investment as well. Both projects are higher cost than what we estimated 3 years ago. Resident planners work through the livability of the site for current residents, future residents, and the respect for the residents of 10th and Page. Part of the cost has to do with parking. Each of those parking spaces is about $150,000. We have to have parking. Residents have vehicles. And so, yes, we want to live in a world where there are a lot less vehicles, but these deals are approved based upon meeting certain requirements, and part of that is making sure that you have adequate parking on the site. And so we needed to build parking. We also needed to go higher up to build additional units, and so it required us to do structured parking. I know it's very expensive. I would rather not spend $150,000 on a parking space, but we really don't have many other options. We've maximized as much of the surface parking spaces as we can, and I think if you look on our site plan, you'll see a lot of street parking, which a lot of the zoning ordinance is not a big fan of right now. And so we are trying to build as many street parking spaces as possible, but the structured parking is needed, and it comes at a really big cost.
Is there also bike parking?
Yes,
and
it's
storage
bike parking and storage in both of the apartment buildings. Any additional units built in phase one would not have additional unit-based subsidy. And so we're committing to providing 140 subsidized units through the voucher. We cannot subsidize anything more than that. The Housing Authority, by doing a project this size, which we need to do, is going to pull a lot of HCV resources to close gaps. So our average voucher cost for a family that's on a regular voucher program is about $1,000 a month. These units are going to cost us about $2,000 a month. And so that's a gap of $1,000 per voucher that we're going to be paying more than we're currently paying for a family that's in a voucher program. And so you're looking at $1.5 million a year in additional funding just going to West Haven from the voucher program. So we can't subsidize anything more than a 140 initially. In a couple of years after that, we should be able to come back and subsidize additional units. But initially, 140 is going to be our cap.
So, but how many more slides do you have?
You're all good.
Okay.
10 minutes.
Yeah. So, so is part A and part B. So, did I hear like $15 million from the city for 1B? Yeah.
Which is the amount that you have already allocated in your CIP over a 3-year period. So that $15 million, based on your presentation, is your contributions to phases 1A and 1B. Is there more, sir?
Well, yes, there will be more, but we're not there. And so part of the phase 2, which will be the townhouses, that's a conversation around looking for other funding options other than LIHTC. LIHTC is really expensive to build a townhouse unit, and so we're going to be looking for other options around financing that will not require us to go towards LIHTC. When we looked at South First Street, the cost to build a market rate townhouse is around $230,000 to $240,000. When we added the LIHTC layer, we're now at $400,000 townhouse.
Mm-hmm. What is the cost of the parking? I know what it is per space. What is the cost for the structure?
I can pull that number and send it to you. I didn't pull out just for the garage itself.
Yeah, yeah.
How many phases total are we seeing at this moment? So 1A and 1B will be built at the same time as 2 separate deals.
Yep.
But how many phases do you see total?
We're looking at 2 phases.
Obviously, LIHTC is a very flawed program in many ways. Unfortunately, it's kind of the only game in town. Very few affordable housing developments get built without LIHTC being part of the stack.
Yep.
If the townhomes at lower AMIs are not feasible without LIHTC, because they're planning for if it is necessary. Because I just imagine if they're homeownership, I mean, there's a land trust model, but if they're rentals, I mean, that's just going to be hard to find enough subsidy.
Oh, it's going to need the voucher subsidy to make them affordable or deeply affordable. The question is, how long do you stagger in between them? So if we work on this project and this project takes 2 years, and then the townhouses take 1.5 to 2 years to be built, I then have 4 years where I'm planning and staggering voucher issuance. So like last year, we didn't issue any vouchers. I'm not anticipating issuing any this year either, because we have South First Street coming online, which is going to take 55 vouchers. And then we have Sixth Street coming online next year, which is going to take 41 vouchers. And so I'm already tapped out on what I plan, or what we planned on issuing, we're going to be project basing over the next year. And so as long as I have some years in between, I can stagger and plan accordingly. But if we want to do above 140 for this first phase, we couldn't do it.
Mr. Sales, could you, while you have the floor, could you describe the 2 requests that are coming before council at the next meeting relative to this project?
For this project, so we have the funding commitment and then the revitalization. And so to make this project competitive with other 9% applications that are going in, it's required that, or it's good for the project to be in a revitalization area that's been identified by City Council. So then Virginia Housing has additional reasons to make investments in that area. And then the other one is actually the funding commitment for these, for at least phase, are you doing phase 1 and B or just 1A?
Madeline, I believe we're doing both parts of phase 1.
Okay, so the funding commitments for phase 1A and 1B, which would be the 15 million, 8 million for phase 1A and 7 million for phase 1B.
So we're just formalizing that.
Correct.
Okay. I got 2 quick questions, if you don't mind.
Yep.
One, how many folks were in the planning group?
So we average about 35 a meeting, but I think we've probably engaged with about 80% or 90%.
Overall, I mean, 80% of the neighborhood, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. And were those meetings conducted in multiple languages?
So we have a language access team, and they come to the meetings, and they will work with the families. And so we have pauses in between, and there's some translation going on.
Wow.
It's really neat.
Yeah,
So we just
cool.
started the language access about a year and a half ago. And so we had already started the redevelopment process, but we were able to get those folks in, and we've been engaging with them.
That's great. And then you talked about this at the presentation last week, but for everyone else, where are people relocating during this process?
Yeah, so part of the reason why this is really important that we strike while we can is because we have a lot of new units coming online. So we have 113 units at South First Street and then 47 at Sixth Street. And so between those 2 sites where we're building larger units, 3, 4s, and 5-bedroom units, we're going to be able to relocate the families at West Haven in some of these new units while we're working on the actual West Haven site. If we did this project 2 or 3 years down the road, I can't guarantee that we'll be able to find a 5-bedroom unit to move a family to, just because there's, number one, there's not that many of them, and the ones that we do have are not affordable. And so we're actually like at the perfect timing where we have the right number of units coming online at the time to actually do a relocation. So when we do relocate folks, we won't have folks that fall in between the cracks and can't find housing.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So just any quick questions?
I would just quickly say, I think obviously this is a project that needs to happen. It's many years overdue. It's going to be extremely large and complex with many unanticipated things happening throughout it. I will say the project itself is obviously critically important. As I've mentioned before, on these streets, you know, the gap in life expectancy is 10 years lower than other areas in our city. So I just hope the city, beyond even West Haven itself, is thinking about, around West Haven, how to be more intentional about things like facilitating Black-owned businesses, facilitating business opportunities for members of the refugee community, businesses that meet their needs, as well as, I know resident services is increased capacity, but services around that area, because you know, residents don't want to be physically or economically segregated from the broader Charlottesville community.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will be ready. Thank you, John. will be read into closed session.
Pursuant to Section 2.2-3712 of the Virginia Code, I move that the City Council close this open meeting and convene in closed session as authorized by the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as follows. Pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A1 for discussion and consideration of prospective candidates to be appointed to the following boards and/or committees: Board of Architectural Review, Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund Committee, Charlottesville Economic Development Authority, Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority, Citizen Transportation Advisory Committee, Community Development Block Grant and Home Task Force, Housing Advisory Committee, Human Rights Commission, JABA Advisory Council on Aging, JABA Board of Directors, Local Board of Building Code Appeals, Minority Business Commission, Piedmont YMCA Board, Sister Cities Commission, Social Services Advisory Board, Thomas Jefferson Water Resources Protection Foundation, Towing Advisory Board, Tree Commission, Vendor Appeals Board, and Youth Council. We are running late, so I'm moving fast.
Yes, you.
Second the motion.
Second. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, please say no. We'll be back 6:30 or close to it. Thank you.